Hello, this is Just Listen, hosted by George. Today is September 18th, 2023. I wanted to talk about the federal government policy on the Ukraine. I've already talked about it, but this is the part two of that conversation. There is a bigger picture here about countries that I want to talk about. And first off, this is not putting any blame on the government. We're just looking at data and history. So here is where we're at. Countries that are successful have a couple of things that the ones that get taken over don't have. An army. You must have a military of some sort to protect the whole country. And countries that don't do that, if we go back in history, we see. So if we go back to the 16 and 1700s, that would account for the continent of Africa, certain parts of it, getting taken over by someone coming in, and they basically exploited that they didn't have an army. And the second part of that is the country or continent must be united. If the country, say like Africa, is not united, then they're more likely to be exploited by people coming in based on lousy senior leaderships of whoever the regional leaders, tribal leaders were back then. The other part of that is you have to have weapons. So if your enemy has guns and you have sticks, you're probably going to lose that kind of conflict. And the world has not learned the lesson of being united and having military and having weapons that you can defend the country. Now, in the 60s, 50s, whenever you want to talk about Israel, they are the perfect model of a country who's surrounded by their enemies, but no one will mess with them because they know that Israel will strike back hard and fast, and they have advanced weapons. I said all of that leading up to the Ukraine. The Ukraine got their independence in 92, and actually they inherited a military structure from the Soviet Union, and they had a lot of stuff that would surprise you. And I'm not going to get into all of that. You can go and find that on the internet. So the Ukraine broke the rules that I told you about earlier. Believe it or not, the Ukraine is not united. And actually, they've had a little bit of a war internally going on, probably for the last 20 years. The other piece of that is that they had a military, okay, but the government wasn't funding it. And there were several key times recently where the president of the country of Ukraine did not want to join NATO whatsoever. And as a result of that, if you look at the timeline from, say, 2018 to 2021 and 22, that did not help them once the war started or leading up to the war. Now, since NATO wasn't a priority, that was the real reason why they didn't get into NATO. And also, there's something called NATO standards that the Ukraine, for some reason, and again, based on the data that I looked at, were dragging their feet. There were all these other internal conflicts that stopped them. You must have a strong military if you're going to protect your country. And also, if you look at a map, okay, they're pretty much, I mean, Russia is there. Big Brother is there, and that was some bad strategy on the part of Ukraine, but it was more because there was internal unrest going on between the government and the people, and some people actually wanted to be a part of Russia again. Now, the only benefit from the Ukraine war, which it doesn't really help the people of the Ukraine, but helps some other nations. It helped Finland and Sweden to join NATO because prior to the Ukraine war, they weren't interested. They don't have big militaries either, and they weren't funding theirs as well either. But when Russia invaded the Ukraine, that prompted them to join NATO. So they're in there. And then within that region itself, Bosnia and Herzegovina, they're going to be part of NATO probably by the end of September. So we can learn lessons from history. And unfortunately, the Ukraine had to find out the hard way since they didn't do the things that I've been talking about. And based on that, that's why I said in my previous podcast that they need to find a way to get common ground with Russia and get the war ended. They cannot keep spending millions and billions of dollars here to fund a war that I just don't see how they can repel the Russians. This is George. Let me know what you think. Goodbye.